It was a chilling Halloween morning when Sergeant Brandon Hauptmann arrived at Kristen Trickle's home, a sight he would never forget. The air was filled with a sense of dread that gripped the heart of even the most seasoned officers. This was not your typical emergency call. Sergeant Hauptmann, a veteran of the Hayes Police Department, was the first to come upon the distressing scene. There, in the once serene bedroom, lay a young woman barely clinging to life. Kristen Trickle, just 26 years old, was found in a state of undress, with a large caliber revolver laying ominously across her abdomen. The sight was horrifying, yet Hauptmann's training kicked in. He quickly moved the weapon away from Kristen, careful not to disturb the scene more than necessary. With determined precision, he lifted her frail body and carried her into the living room. There was an urgency in his actions, a race against time as he initiated CPR in a desperate attempt to save her life. The only visible injury was the entrance wound, a chilling testament to the brutality of the act. The wound was underneath her chin, Hauptmann recounts, his voice heavy with the memory of that fateful day. The grim reality of the situation was setting in, the chances of survival were slim. But Hauptmann and his team were not ones to give up easily. Yet despite their tireless efforts, there was a cruel finality to the situation. Kristen Trickle's life was slipping away, and there was nothing the first responders could do to halt the inevitable. Hauptmann had to deliver the devastating news to Colby, Kristen's husband, who was waiting anxiously on the porch. His voice, captured on his body camera, revealed the heavy burden of his words. "She died, and I'm so sorry." But despite the desperate attempts, there was nothing the first responders could do for Kristen. The unsettling discovery marked the beginning of a perplexing investigation that would leave more questions than answers, and the shocking revelation that this was not a simple case of a fatal shooting. In the aftermath of the tragedy, Hauptmann had the grim task of sharing the devastating news. Hauptmann found Colby Trickle, Kristen's husband, on the porch. In the chilling cold of the Halloween morning, Hauptmann's body camera recorded only the audio of their exchange. Hauptmann, his voice steady yet filled with regret, delivered the unbearable news. Kristen had died. Colby's response, captured in the raw, heart-wrenching audio, was disbelief, a desperate plea for confirmation. "Are you sure? Are you sure?" Hauptmann stood there with Colby, sharing the weight of the shocking news. The reality was too brutal to comprehend, the silence that followed the revelation, deafening. Hauptmann then asked Colby to accompany him to the police station. Despite the shock, Colby agreed, his cooperation crucial for the forthcoming investigation. With the news delivered, the investigation was about to begin. Hauptmann requested Colby Trickle to accompany him to the police station to piece together the events of the tragic night. Hauptmann recalls, Colby, although visibly shaken, agreed without hesitation. He was cooperative and willingly provided a detailed account of their last hours together. According to Colby, it was a seemingly ordinary evening. Kristen had returned home from her shift at Walmart's gardening center. They spent the remaining hours of the day playing video games, a regular pastime for the couple. Colby claimed he retired to bed before Kristen, falling into a deep sleep. His peaceful slumber was shattered by a deafening bang. Disoriented and alarmed, he woke up to a ringing in his ears and a chilling sight. His wife, Kristen, lay motionless next to him, her life fading away with a gunshot wound to her head. The firearm, a large-caliber revolver, was resting ominously near her neck. Shaken and panic-stricken, Colby picked up his phone and dialed 911. While on the call, he instinctively checked Kristen's pulse, but it was too late. She was lifeless. In an act of desperation, he picked the revolver off her body. For a fleeting moment, he contemplated ending his own life as well. But the hopeful thought that help was on its way held him back. While Colby was recounting these gut-wrenching details at the police station, Kristen's aunt and uncle, Delyn and Brant Rice, received the devastating news of their niece's untimely death. The information was incomprehensible, a stark contrast to the Kristen they knew and loved. Adding to their bewilderment was Colby's claim that Kristen's death was a suicide. Colby Trickle's account painted a picture of a horrifying discovery, but the investigation was far from over. The Hayes Police Department had a daunting task ahead. They were tasked with the difficult job of investigating a case that was as perplexing as it was tragic. The task of uncovering the truth behind Kristen's death had only just begun. As Colby continued to recount the events, he revealed a moment of desperation. As he found Kristen, lifeless beside him, the shocking reality of the situation began to sink in. The ringing in his ears, the sight of his wife's lifeless body, the cold touch of the revolver, it all culminated in a moment that would forever change his life. In the midst of his shock and terror, Colby made an admission that sent chills down the spines of the investigators. He confessed that for a brief moment, he contemplated ending his own life. The revolver, still warm from the fatal shot, was now pointed towards himself. A desperate act born from the depths of despair, contemplated in the face of the unthinkable. But as he held the revolver, the 911 operator's voice broke through his thoughts. They were sending help. A glimmer of hope, perhaps, that they might be able to do something for Kristen. With that, he set the revolver aside, his thoughts of suicide subsiding as he clung onto the hope that help was on the way. But there was more to the story. As Colby narrated his actions in the immediate aftermath of his wife's death, investigators began to piece together a complex picture. He mentioned checking Kristen's pulse, finding nothing. He spoke about moving the revolver from her body, his hands likely trembling as he did so. Every action, every movement, every word painted a picture of a man faced with an unthinkable reality. A reality that, in the heat of the moment, almost drove him to make a decision that would have only added to the tragedy. Yet, as the investigators listened, they found themselves faced with more questions than answers. Was his account of the event accurate? Could the shock and trauma have clouded his memory? And most importantly, why would Kristen, a seemingly happy young woman, take her own life? In the face of such a traumatic event, Colby's reactions raised questions that needed answers. While Colby was at the station, the tragic news reached Kristen's family, leaving them in a state of disbelief. The chilling phone call that Delynn Rice, Kristen's aunt, received from her mother was a surreal moment that would forever carve a deep scar in the fabric of their family. The words, "Kristen is dead, she's been shot," echoed in her mind, a constant agonizing reminder of a life lost too soon. Delynn recalled the chilling moment, her voice trembling with the weight of her grief. "I got a call from my mom, and worst phone call ever to get. She said Kristen is dead. She's been shot. And it was just awful. I said, 'Mom, that can't be right. That can't be right. That doesn't even make sense.'" It was a nightmare that no family should ever have to endure, but the nightmare was far from over. As the news began to sink in, another shocking revelation surfaced. Kristen's death wasn't a result of foul play as one might instinctively suspect. No, according to Colby Trickle, Kristen's husband, it was a suicide. This revelation was met with incredulity by Kristen's family. Kristen, a vibrant young woman full of life, resorting to such a desperate act? It was unthinkable. Brant Rice, Kristen's uncle, a local pastor, and a pillar of strength for the family during this trying time, expressed their initial disbelief. What did you tell investigators initially? "We just don't think she would do this?" The tragic news left a profound impact on the family. A cloud of confusion, grief, and disbelief hung over them, a painful testament to the tragedy that had befallen their beloved Kristen. The family was left grappling with a harsh reality that seemed too cruel to be true. The family was left reeling, struggling to understand the news that Kristen's death was a suicide. A veil of sorrow descended upon them, a stark reminder of the vibrant life that was tragically cut short. As the pieces of the puzzle didn't seem to fit, the investigators took an unprecedented step, a psychological autopsy. A psychological autopsy, in essence, is a post-death examination of the mind. It's a tool used by investigators to help construct the deceased's state of mind leading up to their death. It's not a physical procedure, like a traditional autopsy, but rather an analytical process involving interviews with family, friends, colleagues, anyone who might provide insight. In this case, it was used to assemble a psychological portrait of Kristen Trickle. Detectives dove into the depths of Kristen's life, seeking to understand her thinking, her emotions, her behavior in the days, weeks, even months prior to her death. They scoured her personal writings, her social media activity, her interpersonal relationships. They asked probing questions. What was her state of mind? Was she showing signs of depression? Was there a history of mental illness? Was there evidence of a suicide plan? The investigators also interviewed Colby Trickle, Kristen's husband. They scrutinized his testimony, examining his account of Kristen's behavior, their relationship, and the events leading up to that fateful morning. But the psychological autopsy didn't stop there. The process also involved consulting with mental health professionals. They brought in psychologists, psychiatrists who could provide clinical insight into Kristen's mindset based on the information gathered. The goal was to assess if Kristen's death was indeed a suicide, as initially claimed, or if perhaps there was more to the story. If there were discrepancies, inconsistencies between the psychological profile that emerged and the circumstances of Kristen's death, it could suggest an alternative explanation. And as the process unfolded, it began to challenge the suicide theory. The psychological autopsy revealed a woman who, while she had her struggles, didn't appear to be in the depths of despair typically associated with suicide. There was no evidence of a suicide note, no clear indicators of a plan to end her life. Moreover, there were inconsistencies in Colby's account of events, discrepancies that didn't align with the psychological profile of Kristen that was emerging. It raised questions, doubts about the validity of the suicide claim. The psychological autopsy, a first in Kansas, was a game changer. It didn't provide definitive answers, but it did cast a new light on the case. It prompted the investigators to question the initial assumptions, to consider the possibility that Kristen's death might not have been a suicide after all. The psychological autopsy, a first in Kansas, shed new light on the case, challenging the initial assumptions. With the psychological autopsy results in hand, the case took an unexpected turn. The psychological autopsy, a tool used to determine the mindset of the deceased at the time of their death, had been carried out meticulously. The investigators examined every facet of Kristen Trickle's life, from her personal relationships to her work environment. They delved into her mental health history, her habits, and her interactions with others. The findings were both illuminating and perplexing. Kristen, according to friends and family, was a vibrant woman who loved her job at the gardening center. She was known for her infectious laughter and her passion for life. But the autopsy revealed a darker side. It painted a picture of a woman who had been struggling internally, grappling with demons that those around her were unaware of. Yet, even with this new information, the case was far from closed. The autopsy results did not conclusively prove that Kristen had taken her own life. They merely suggested that she had been battling with mental health issues, a fact that could be interpreted in multiple ways. The implications of these findings were profound. They transformed the investigation, shifting the focus from a straightforward crime scene analysis to a more complex exploration of Kristen's mental state. The investigators were forced to reevaluate every piece of evidence in light of this new perspective. But the psychological autopsy, as comprehensive as it was, could not answer all the questions. It could not explain why Kristen was found almost entirely undressed. It could not account for the position of the firearm or the fact that her husband, Colby, did not hear the gunshot. And so the quest for truth continued. The investigators, armed with the insights from the psychological autopsy, delved deeper into the case. They revisited the crime scene, re-interviewed witnesses, and dug into Kristen's past. They scrutinized her relationship with Colby, her work life, her social interactions. They sought to understand why a woman who seemed so full of life could have been harboring such darkness inside her. And as they delved deeper, they uncovered more inconsistencies, more puzzle pieces that didn't fit. The mystery surrounding Kristen Trickle's death deepened. The answers seemed to slip further away, obscured by layers of complexity and contradiction. But the investigators remained undeterred. They knew that the truth was out there, hidden somewhere in the maze of evidence and testimony. They knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the key that would unlock the mystery. They were driven by a relentless pursuit of justice, a determination to bring closure to a case that had shaken the community to its core. And so the investigation continued, each day bringing new revelations, new challenges, and new questions. As we delve deeper into the mystery surrounding Kristen Trickle's death, we are left with more questions than answers, reminding us that truth can be more elusive than it seems.